Hello and welcome to the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast. This is an episode from way back when, a blessing in disguise. It says, Chris, an indirect approach to magical workings. So what comes to mind if I say an indirect approach to magical workings or magic in general?
Well, I'm a bit gutted because a blessing in disguise. I just thought you were talking about me. Rude. Indirect methods of working. Well, there's the there's the I kind of feel like you need to split it into the kind of hex to heal. Is one of those ones where people would probably consider that to be the direct route, in the sense that directness often comes with attack something. I feel like the indirect route, still potentially hex to heal still applies. I just don't think people see it in the way that they probably should. So I think indirect suggests that the least obvious route, which starts to kind of contradict what we often talk about, which is that magic will take the most efficient route. So
Magic does
factor that in.
But the person themselves doesn't necessarily need to, so the magical operator doesn't need to. Because to a certain extent, you could be saying they means thinking outside of the box. And a lot of practitioners, in order to overcome obstacles and things, need to work outside of the box. If you're wanting to work magic on another practitioner that's at the same sort of level as you, or maybe even higher, then you really need to think outside of the box for that. Take the long route. Like what the SAS do is when they go and, they would go and take the point of attack that you'd least suspect. So if there's a nice little road or something like that, they won't march down the road, knock on the front gate. They'll like scale down the mountainside or something like that behind. That's the sort of thing. So for me, a blessing in disguise, to a certain extent, I think the first thing that comes to mind is
surprise attacks.
Surprise attacks, yeah. To a certain extent, I suppose you say that. I'd say trying to disguise what you're actually doing. So multi-layered magic as well. So people you expect, much like when you do the whole protective measure of using a mask or something like that, you expect them to trace the spell back. You expect them to trace the spell back to a mask or an egregore or a fake persona or something like that, so that you yourself hide behind that. That's to a certain extent what I'm kind of getting at. But at the same time, blessed in disguise, I think of like a lot of these like films that you get, pop cultural magic and stuff, where you've got some nasty person was really rude to a witch, so the witch curses them to be really, really ugly, and then they have to fall in love, and someone needs to love them in order to undo the curse, and that they will not, kind of like Beauty and the Beast style shit. That kind of thing. Because that's a blessing in disguise in that, well, they were vain and nasty and stuff and not very nice to everyone, and then all of a sudden they're ugly, which is terrible, or they got the plague or something. And that's bad, but at the same time they find love, and then they will live happily ever after. So that is to a certain extent a blessing in disguise, because it's something horrible that ends up becoming something good long term, much like a lot of the little quests and situations we put some of our mentees on. Is a little bit of suffering at the current that you don't think you're going to get to, but eventually you all look back and you think, oh, look at this mountain I've scaled. I mean, the journey up was shit, and the journey back down again will be shit, but it's so pretty at the top and picturesque.
There is an aspect of that kind of Beauty and the Beast kind of approach, though, that is designed about the struggle that's involved in order to become a better something. So that kind of pressure makes diamonds, and the change of perspective is often required in order for you to grow as a person. So I kind of, a big part of that is, in order for a plant to have a strong stem, it needs to battle with the wind. It's part and parcel what is required in order to make struggle makes things stronger. That kind of dialogue, which has a lot of truth in it. I think part of the problem with the kind of snowflake generation.
You're saying it, Chris. You can't talk about the snowflake generation. It triggers people.
Is where they struggle with the concept of actually having to earn knowledge, and where we get accused of gatekeeping, is down to that kind of point of kind of going, actually, some of these lessons you can't read about. They have to be done. I think astral travel is one of those where people want it to be formulaic. They want there to be I do this step and then I do that step, and I get to the astral. What they forget is obviously the fact that everybody's astral body, like your actual human body, because it's a mirror of each other, believe it or not.
Occult gnosis or something? Is that something people should be writing down with their note taken?
Possibly.
We know some of them are taking notes. Should they be writing that down and underlining it?
Well, probably. Hermetic law and all that, as above, so below, kind of says that you should be considering, well, actually, how different the physical body is from person to person. Therefore, you should expect an energetic shift to have to be as unique, whereas they don't want things to be formulaic. They don't want they don't want things to be that obvious. They want there to be a nice simple, I do this and then I do that and then I'm there. And because in the way in which our education system, which we go on and on about all the time in the West, is that kind of, they want to be able to predict an outcome. They want to know how something is going to manifest based on blue and green. You're going to get a darker green. They like the idea that when you additively mix things, you're going to get a specific set of outcomes. And I think particularly when it comes to this astral point, of kind of moving through, then there is a certain amount of struggle and figuring out that has to happen. It's a challenge for a reason. We're not being difficult just for the sake of being difficult.
Sometimes we are.
We often are. But for something like that, people just need to get into their heads, actually, this is different for everybody. I think what made me think about that is because we were talking about it with a mentee this morning about, how a lot of spellcraft is sold in that way. Here are guaranteed results, X amount. And with a lot of spellcraft, there are certain levels of perfect that can be achieved. Spellcraft is very different to altered states. So going through a series of different kinds of altered states, they are individualized because they are experiences. There is a cognitive processing part that has to happen, which means no two people on the same LSD are going to have the same trip. It's because that has to interact with the chemicals in your own body and how your body takes that in. Why would they expect magic to be any different? You have a unique makeup, therefore when that astral state is combined with your physical state, your comprehension of that is going to be, yes, there'll be an algorithm to it, in the sense that there is a kind of, this composition with that composition will create this. But no one knows that because no one's actually sat down and worked out what that comprehension is, because it's too big. It's kind of, supercomputer algorithm level AI prediction is what we're talking about in order to get how individualized those compositions are.
Right. So I have something for you to process in a cognitive way in the form of a question, right? Now, there's this thing, because you talked about hermetic, right? So Doctor Who's sonic screwdriver can undo a hermetic seal, can it? But would it be able to break a hermetic law? I.e., can the hermetic laws be broken? Are they just bullshit?
Oh, sorry. I got too tied into the Doctor Who aspect of that and not enough into the magical aspect of the question.
Okay.
Very
Well,
sorry.
answer both questions. Can Doctor Who's sonic screwdriver undo a hermetic law? And are hermetic laws, or are they bullshit? Because this would be proper occult gnosis that people will copy onto notepaper and underline. If Chris were to say something as outlandish as the hermetic laws are not really a thing.
I feel like people should have to pay for that answer, really, and I feel it's wrong that we should be asking that question on this side. This is a naughty zone kind of question.
Shall I ask you again in 20 minutes time?
No, I'll answer it anyway, in a loose way, and then maybe we can go a bit further later. So, like the laws of physics, everything can be bent to a certain extent.
I cannot change the laws of physics, Captain.
So you can bet, like lots of people talk about breaking rules.
Yeah.
Well, often you're not breaking a rule. You're making an exception. Now, an exception is bending. It's a flexibility. It's a loophole. Those are all operating within the kind of solid law that is there, by allowing for its flexibility. So that's kind of legal law. So then apply that how we consider kind of physics, how we consider hermetic law. Both of those have their bending, but ultimately, in order to make something completely new, some of them actually need to be broken. So I don't like them because we talk about them a lot of the time to kind of reinforce a person's understanding. I think, like in the way that we talk about physics exponentially, so when we go, we talk about solids, liquids and gases, and that kind of schooling way of you have to have a foundation in this before you can break that to understand the next stage.
Yeah.
I feel like the Hermetics are like that. I feel like they are a certain level of understanding that once you get past them, they appear to be a load of bollocks, but they are a necessary step to getting to the next level of understanding. Have I circumvented that quickly enough?
I think the solids and liquids and gases is sometimes you think it's going to come out in gas form and you follow through and it comes out in solid form.
Why do you have to make that a
sorry, we can go back to talking about Doctor Who.
A disgusting crudeness.
That's my bit, Chris.
That you feel necessary.
That's the takeaway bit. No one cares about the other stuff. The only stuff they remember is poo jokes.
Oh, I hate toilet humour, and you know
it. So, the Hermetic laws and such like that are obviously man-made and woo man-made and they-made and whatever. People-made, right? They're people-made. So they're kind of based on observations and people trying to work out structure in that to the universe. I have something for people to ponder, right? Because if I break the law, like I don't know, I go really, really fast in speed, as I've done on numerous occasions. If no one's looking, I get away with it. Like if you tweak a little bit of the laws and such within the foundations and the fabric of the universe and that, witches do that all the time, don't they? When they cast spells and stuff like that, they change outcomes and they reconnect things so that the marble on the marble run don't come out that exit, it comes out of a different one. In which case it means that they have manifesting money or whatever it is the fuck they're trying to manifest in their spell casting. So that happens all the time, rejigging and kind of bending as to what's supposed to happen and such. However, when I go through the speed camera or where I go really fast down that one road with the hill where that fucking cunt of a police officer likes to park his little fucking tripod with his camera on, and then I get what's called done, isn't it? I get done, which means I get a fucking speeding ticket. Now, that is merely because of the Gestapo, the powers that be. They noticed in it. So, Chris, when someone does something really big in the universe and that, like tries to break these laws and stuff, is it the fact that they're unbreakable, or is it just the fact that it might attract attention from bigger things that try to get in the way because they're bastards and they're there to, what was it they say? Oh, you know, enforce this laws which is there for public decency and public safety and all that kind of thing. I mean, is it to stop the universe from being destabilized? And that is that what all these hermetic laws are useful? Can you dissolve them completely? Is it really that they can't be dissolved, or is it that when you try to pour liquids on it and burn it, that someone come along and slap handcuffs on you? What up with that? Tell us that. Is this all just a blessing in disguise in the fact that we are doing the comic stuff, but actually there's something profound behind it?
I like how many of these blessings you're trying to interpretations of blessing in disguise that you're trying to fit in this. It's almost like you're making an actual effort for a change.
No, I don't tend to do a lot of effort.
So I'm not going to justify your speeding. Sorry, if that's what you wanted me to do. I'm not going to do that. What I am going to say is yes to the concept of, you know, it's one of those, if a tree falls down in the woods and there's nobody around to hear it, does it make a sound? So, you know, it is that kind of going, actually, if no one caught you doing it, no one's going to enforce it, the rule that you are talking about. Now, I think that specifically kind of plays with the idea of these laws being almost legal. That kind of gives that legal slant, doesn't it? Of somebody has decided these are the rules. Well, again, you also pointed out quite helpfully that these are rules that we designed, and I don't mean me and Liam. We're very good at making rules up, but that's the hermetic ones I'm not taking credit for. And they are based on, like you say, observation. So they believe that because they've seen something happen enough times, therefore 1 + 2 is 3. So, you know, there is that kind of like, this happens, then that happens, therefore this is the general rule. And I think that's how they have to be observed, really, is they are general rules. So, you know, 99.9 times you try that, you are going to get the same response. Whereas I think what people want you to say is that, no, these are infallible, and you can't possibly change those things. Well, actually, you know, we also see that happen all the time. You know, we bend time every day in just our experience of it, because actually the kind of time aspect doesn't really exist. It's an illusion created for us to comprehend what is happening. That's why when you're having a good day, it happens really, really fast. And that's why when you're having a really shit day, and you're doing something you really hate doing, it feels like it lasts 20 years.
But the atomic clock said that it were the same, Chris. The atomic clock said.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, these hermetic laws and other such laws and such like that, are they a blessing in disguise in that at least they provide some kind of structure that either gives you something that you can go by and you have to break the rules? Because breaking the laws and breaking the rules can be fun. It can also be very, very, very educational, because if there was such magical laws and stuff, like this whole karma bullshit, that they think that, oh, I cannot do bad things or bad things will happen to me. Tell that to Jimmy Savile. You can't, he's dead, he got away with it. So, you know, that kind of thing is like, well, look for exceptions to the rules or exceptions to the laws and such like that. And then when you find exceptions, then you have to rework the laws. I was told by a psychologist that the human psyche is very fragile, and that it really, really struggles with a lot of things that are very scary, like big things, without structure, and that very scary. The fact that there may not be a God, very scary. The fact that what will we do if we don't have laws and such, very scary. The fact that there's no such real thing as like ethics and morality, and no one really fucking gives a shit, quite scary. Free for all. It would be turmoil, it would be terrible. It's like, well, wait a minute, the only reason we have these ethics and morality and such like that is because it's not real. They're written down and stuff, but not everyone subscribes to them. Therefore, they are not universal laws and real. It's something that you subscribe to, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. A lot of people think about all of this, thou shalt not murder, and that we can obviously put that one on the table about murdering, because murdering's bad, and yet there's lots of people, murderers out there that don't have a problem with it. It's not like everyone.
If they were universal laws, every company, every country in the world would have the same set. So because that would truly be universal in the sense that. But what we actually do is we create rules in order to coexist. So to comfortably coexist with other human beings, we have to create a code of conduct
and not kill our neighbors.
You know, so there are general assumptions that have to be made, and then those ones have to get whittled down until they, we get some solid, coherent understanding. So the Hermetic laws are there purely to try and understand and make sense of how the universe works, in the same way that the laws of physics are, but they're constantly redefined all the time. There was a recent one, really, a recent discovery recently, where they were looking at with a new kind of telescope. I'm hoping I didn't dream this up. They were looking at where they found older universes that shouldn't exist by the rules in which they had previously ascribed, which says there are universes out there that were essentially fully formed sooner after the Big Bang than we are. So therefore there is a speed process that they hadn't factored in that says, well, actually those older universes shouldn't exist.
Of course they should. Don't they understand fourth dimensional living?
They don't.
Well,
so, but that's what then hinders the way in which they perceive what they're looking at. So they look at something and they go, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, it only doesn't make sense if you are restricted by these kind of physical laws that we talk about. And when I say physical laws, I mean of laws of physics. That, let's face it, most of the time any physicist worth their salt is spending their time bending and breaking them all the time. But again, it comes down to level of understanding, in my opinion, of kind of like where you're actually at will depend on your level of understanding of the process, which will in turn dictate the effectiveness of the impact you're able to make. And I think as practitioners, particularly, that's what happens, is people are operating at their level, and they need to stop looking at what other people are doing as a measure of how well they are doing in order to actually understand. Like, it's good to look at other people's practice, very, very good. Look at as many different kinds of practice as possible. What's difficult is for them to then measure themselves against it as some kind of rule of thumb, when actually you're going to have to work this out yourself, because the limitation that's put on you is by your perception of what's possible. 9 times out of 10 is the limiting factor that happens in your practice. You aren't capable of thinking big enough in order to find a new way, a new direction to take, or a new approach that might be necessary. A blessing in disguise.
So let's peel it back a little bit to just the blessing part of the blessing in disguise, because we understand disguise, but do we even really understand a blessing? Are we all on the same page about a blessing? You know, because a blessing dependent, you could use that in a bunch of different contexts. So there's the idea that you give someone your blessing, which is kind of like an agreement to a certain extent. What that means, I think it depends on the person that's giving the blessing. Because for some, I've seen blessing, I give you my blessing means I'm not going to get in your way. I'm not necessarily going to help you. I'm just not going to get in your way, And then you also see blessings as someone was blessed with something. So whether it be something from the gods or whether it be something from their family, that person was blessed with a very pretty face and an 8.5-inch cock. Is that a blessing? Was that really given? Is that a blessing, or did that just kind of happened? Blessing kind of implies that you're actually consciously giving it, doesn't it? You're giving them someone your blessing. So a blessing in disguise, presumably that's something positive, something good that's happening in something that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
Like
not necessarily good, not necessarily bad.
Yeah. Our good Christian friends say the Lord works in mysterious ways and such. And yet, if they're not comfortable with how the Lord is at working, it's from the devil, isn't it?
Again, perspective has a lot to answer for.
Perspective does have a lot to answer for. Okay, so wrapping up in the last minute or two, what would your definition of a blessing be? If we put you on the spot.
A blessing, specific in this context or just in general?
I think in different contexts. I mean, how many different ways can you think of using a blessing which isn't necessarily the same? Because again, I've said like a gift, or I've said like an agreement to a certain extent. I don't know if there's any others technically. There's like the whole pagan thing where they bless people, like a ritual type thing. What's that, like a fucking good luck spell or something? I'm not sure.
Okay, so there are kind of the almost religious aspects of blessing, like you say, or the ritual idea of blessing. There is, like you say, a gift. Anything unexpected, really, to me, is so something additional to what I put in. So an unexpected addition. So regardless of whether or not that is necessarily, it doesn't need to be a blessing in the sense of something good. It just needs to be unexpected, but in a somewhat positive slant. So, oh, well, somebody turned up to help me do this. So I now get an extra hour left at the end where I can do something else that I wasn't expecting to do. Or suddenly that piece of work has been cancelled. So I know I'm going to suddenly have an easier day. Like, to me, those are the kind of blessings that I'm not expecting.